Welcome to Brainstorm MTG. I'm ELD, and this is Fast Effect Double Speed Magic the Gathering from ELD's Time Vault Games in Bellingham, Mass. We have Connor versus Dean, Sneak Attack, Sneak and Show versus Blue Red Delver. A really solid legacy matchup. Both are blue-red decks, and they could not play out any different. Sneak and Show, a combo deck, looking to use Show and Tell and Sneak Attack, along with Omniscience to put in creatures like Gristlebrand and Emrakul, just the best creatures ever printed. Delver, on the other hand, is going to be playing very low-to-the-ground threats. Delver of Secrets, Young Pyromancer, and the new Dreadhorde Arcanist, which has been putting in serious work in this archetype, really bringing it back from a point where previously people were more interested in going 3, possibly 4 color. Blue-Red Delver now does make a strong argument for going just 2 colors, having a simpler mana base, and jamming in some more burn, and using that redundancy off of the Arcanist to either get additional card drawing or just additional burn to finish out the game. And there is the man himself, Dreadhorde Arcanist. That gets Force of Willed, pitching, I believe, Force of Will. Yes, 2 Invocation Forces. Connor not messing around here. A very interesting line. A lot of the time, the Sneak Attack deck is going to need to use its counter spells to protect itself. Here, Connor playing a little bit more of a control route, preventing that Arcanist from potentially just burying him in card advantage. We'll see if it pays off. And here's another Arcanist. Probably the only criticism of the card is it doesn't necessarily scale perfectly. It is possible to run out of quality cards to flash back. Of course, that's a good problem to have, but it's a problem nonetheless, and beating down for 1 a turn is underwhelming if your opponent is able to counteract your graveyard. Not usually the type of deck you're going to bring in Graveyard Hate against, but if you were playing, say, a combo deck that happens to run Leyline of the Void, you would not be complaining about shutting off their Dreadhorde Arcanist. Connor now trying to sculpt his hand with Ponder. Likely feels very far behind. The Arcanist is down despite his best efforts, force pitching Force. In my experience with Sneak Attack, other versus other blue decks, if you have double counter backup, that's usually good enough. You can typically go for it with a Force and a Spell Pierce, or a couple of Forces, anything along those lines. Very difficult for your opponent to have 3 counter spells to stop you. And of course, you can always draw back into key combo pieces later. Wasteland now from Dean. This Young Pyromancer now threatening to go quite wide as well. Emrakul's Annihilator trigger, a very powerful effect, forcing your opponent to sacrifice 6 permanents. Pyromancer, one of the few cards in the format that can potentially create a situation where you can survive that. So every once in a while they'll put in a Emrakul off of a Sneak Attack, and Pyromancer can potentially create so many tokens that you can save maybe the Pyromancer and some lands and still be able to find a way to win, even after sacrificing 6 permanents thanks to the abundance of elemental tokens. Here we see Force of Will stopping the Sneak Attack. Ancient Tomb putting some more pressure on Connor's life total, and that actually does it right there. Connor picking it up. Dean ready to try and win Game 2. No need to go to a Game 3. He is not paid by the hour. It is a good crowd here at ELD's Time Vault Games. Really happy with the support. We've been doing Wednesday and Friday Night Legacy, 7 p.m. Dean very often in attendance. Connor makes many of them as well. This past week I loaned out Elves to Connor so he could play something that was not blue. We are a few weeks behind now. I'm really burning through these videos, trying to catch up. Multiple reasons. Obviously, I want to get the content out there to you guys, but also very interested as I'm going through seeing the progression of the Modern Horizons cards being integrated into the metagame. Renin 6, an extremely powerful card, but there's a lot of other cards. Plague Engineer, even the Icefang Coatl, Modern Horizons, just a phenomenally impactful set. Blue-Red Delver likely has a bunch of solid counter options. Cards like Red Elemental Blast, Blue Elemental Blast even, Flusterstorm, Spell Pierces. I mean, there's no shortage of counters when you're looking at a Blue-Red Delver shell. And of course, getting double duty off of those with Snapcaster can be very strong. Though that may at this point be competing too much with Dreadhorde Arcanist. I have not seen Dean's entire list. We'll see if he is also running Snapcaster. I would like to think there's enough room for both. No Delver, though, on turn 1 here for Dean. Which is really where this deck wants to be. If you can set a Delver out on the first turn, keep solid pressure every turn that your opponent is either playing around your counters or running just face first into them, ends up just accumulating more and more damage. Cards like Daze obviously much better in the early game. If you can create a situation where your opponent has to move forward, you're much better off when you're the one playing those conditional counters. Eventually your opponent will have enough mana to essentially negate the card, just pay the 1 or 2 mana with Spell Pierce. And that is definitely not where you want to be. So, for Dean's sake, he's hoping for a creature. Defense Grid, a very powerful card here in the matchup. Spell Pierce from Dean. Connor grabbing a Volcanic Island. Will he have a Spell Pierce or Flusterstorm back? And he does. Spell Pierce, targeting that Spell Pierce. Once this defense grid gets down, it's going to be... Oh, and there's the Daze. Oh, what a brutal card. Tapped out. Oh, and now Winter Orb. An absolutely filthy sideboard card here. That is going to slow Connor down significantly. But again, it would be so much better if he had some type of pressure. Winter Orb is essentially going to do nothing if he just gets to untap these lands at his leisure. And that's what it's looking like right now. Still no threat. Arid Mesa, that's not putting any pressure on Connor's life total. Preordain. That does feel pretty bad, I think, for Connor. Tapping cantrips directly into this Winter Orb. Winter Orb along with Daze. Part of my first very competitive deck that I played in Vintage back in the day. Oh, and Grim Lavamancer doesn't actually play great with Winter Orb either. A lot of fetching going on here. Plenty of basic lands. Miracle Grow back in the day in Vintage. That was some of the best deck building I had seen up until that point. Learned a lot about the game from playing that. Force back. And it's time to put stuff in off of Show and Tell. Emrakul, this is one of the rare matchups where Emrakul's actually potentially good enough off of Show and Tell. That's usually plan D. So many decks capable of actually handling the Titan. Cards from Liliana, Liliana's Triumph, Jace the Mind Sculptor bouncing it, Karakas. I mean, there's an incredible amount of answers to Emrakul. I know it doesn't seem it for those of you that don't play Legacy, because he has protection from colored spells, but that's only going to stop things like Swords to Plowshares. And really, there's just no shortage for most decks in their ability to handle Emrakul. Blue-Red Delver, one of the rare exceptions. Its creature removal is largely pushed into its Burn Suite, which is also player removal. And then it also has access to cards like Vapor Snag. So here we see a Show and Tell Emrakul being good enough. Dean this time leading out with Delver. That's exactly what he's looking for. And it doesn't get much better than that. Blind flipping the Delver with a Spell Pierce. So getting an exceptionally good card in the matchup into his hand while accelerating the clock. And a Lotus Petal from Connor. Coming down. He does have sneak attack mana here on his turn 2. Not going for it quite yet. He knows he's got a Spell Pierce to play around. Another land. And Connor all the way down to 11. Now that Wasteland, as we see, so much better when you have that Delver out. It's essentially time walking your opponent. No big deal when there's no lopsided board presence, but when you've got that 3/2 insect beating down, every extra land drop that they have to make up is an extra 3 damage. Ancient Tomb. Opting to keep the basic island. Oh, and here we go. Show and tell. Dean going to be able to potentially throw a Spell Pierce at this, forcing him to tap out, and then maybe follow up with another Daze or Spell Pierce. Pyroblast. So doesn't even need to waste the Spell Pierce. He's got a Pyroblast. Down to just 5. 1 burn spell will do it. Doesn't need to fire it off right this second. Wasteland, taking out Ancient Tomb, and another Delver for good measure. Wasteland's just so good in this matchup, and this is exactly how you draw it up from a blue-red Delver perspective. Passing the turn. Delver does not flip, so not everything was completely perfect here for Dean, but Connor down to just 1 life. What can he do from here? A hasty Emrakul would be fine, but he knows he still has that Spell Pierce to play against. Force of Will no longer an option. Ancient Tomb, taking his own life, going down to -1, showing how close he was to being able to put out an Emrakul with haste. But it was not to be, and Dean taking it down in 3. That is all for this one, but don't worry, there is a lot more. You can check out our older videos, and we're always putting out new videos from ELD's Time Vault games in Bellingham, Massachusetts. If you want to help the channel, of course, you can like, subscribe, share, tap that notification bell so you can know the next time our new videos come out. Thanks for watching.